Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing horror discussions, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of the Overlook Hotel. So we're not going to waste any time. We're going to jump right into this one because I'm incredibly excited to talk about it. We were rewatching The Shining in theaters at Alamo the other day.
Pause. Have we talked about The Shining before?
No, we haven't.
All right. First time.
And there was this, and I've seen this movie a million times. I love it. I've always loved it. Everyone loves it. I don't know why that was so...
They love it. I love it. Everybody loves it. Got to bring in as many impressions as we can while it's still funny.
So there's a moment where Jack Torrance sits down at the bar and speaking in that mocking, bitter, aggrieved hyperbole that is so funny and rewarding, he declares that he would sell his soul for a drink.
Oh, boy.
So let's talk about The Shining as a Faust fable.
The wheels are turning.
Jack Torrance is our Faustus vessel. He's the
Sure.
one who sells his soul to the devil. So the immediate follow-up here, if we're applying the Faustus framing to The Shining, is who's the devil? Mm-hmm. And this is where I think we get funky. This is where the comparison of Faustus and The Shining becomes rewarding and interesting to talk about. Because the devil in this story is the Overlook Hotel.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
Whatever actual demon or presence underpins the hotel remains a gesture, unseen throughout the film, which I love. I think that's Lovecraftian. It retains the mystique, the distance, the horror, and the possibility of the demon, that it can't really be literally represented. Maybe there are moments where we get little glimpses of it in the same way you get that one flash of Pazuzu in The Exorcist.
Yeah, sure.
We get maybe one fleeting shot of the human form of this demon still behind this mask, I think, when he's talking to Lloyd. I think you could probably call that the mouth of the demon, the mouthpiece of the demon, in the same way you have the mouth of Sauron in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that is almost doing the bargaining.
That's true. Because I was thinking maybe it's the old woman in room 234. Maybe it's the weird puppet, the furries who Wendy sees. But no, those are more just like images and manifestations of and extensions of whatever this devil is of the hotel, whereas Lloyd is the actual mouthpiece.
Because when he says he'll sell his soul to the devil, he's talking to Lloyd. So I think Lloyd becomes more of an avatar for that unseen devil in that moment. But more interestingly, and I think uniquely compared to all the other Faustus retellings, as I'm arguing, that we've talked about previously on the show, the thing The Shining does that is so cool is that it prioritizes almost the legion of Faustuses that you have, where all of the previous caretakers, Grady, everyone else who's in the ballroom, they're all collected here in the Overlook. It's almost like all the previous souls that Mephistopheles has collected, he's gathered up here. Like the Overlook is his bank vault of souls. It's the waiting room to get to hell. It's where he keeps all of his conquests and possessions. And they're kind of stuck here because they've been gathered up and swallowed up by him. So this is an interesting reframing. Instead of making Mephistopheles a character, I would argue that the way he's represented in The Shining, he's almost more of a location. Which reframes the way you engage with the source material here of Dr. Faustus, because it means you constantly reference the end game of Dr. Faustus, where Faustus, he's made the deal with the devil, he's gotten the terms that he bargained for, and now it's time to pay up. So Mephistopheles comes back, and all the demons drag him down to hell. The contract is complete, and he dies.
Yeah.
In The Shining, that part kind of happens first.
Yeah.
Because Jack shows up at the Overlook in the second scene.
Right. It immediately swallows him.
He's already dragged down to hell, and we get to see what happens when he's living there.
Sure, we get to see what's happening in hell. Interesting.
So we're playing with the unseen, almost that suggested aftermath of Dr. Faustus as a play.
Sure. Well, and it's interesting that he gets to bring Wendy and Danny down there with him, and then they get out.
And that's where we get to play with some other of my favorite devilly sort of stories here.
Oh, okay.
It's a wonderful reversal because you're evolving the Dr. Faustus framework into almost Dante territory. Where if you read the Overlook as basically hell, if it's a location where all these souls are gathered, you get to grapple with almost the practical mechanics of the afterlife. And then you have Wendy and Danny as guests passing through. They become almost the pilgrim.
Sure, yeah.
And where they're taking this tour of hell, but we know they don't stay there.
Right, and they're not unaffected. Like Dante and Virgil the pilgrim and Virgil get to explore hell, but they're not actually part of it. They're not being tortured. I don't think there's really ever any danger of them getting stuck there. It's more just like this third party observation of it and, analysis and understanding of it, but they're not like part of it. Whereas here, like the danger is that Danny and Wendy could also get trapped down there, could also get not just like physically trapped in the Overlook, but swallowed by it and brought into that like madness and death, whether literal or figurative, that Jack is experiencing.
The Overlook is making a play for their souls as well. I think it's offering them contracts that they are smart or fortunate enough to refuse.
Sure.
Even if you see the way the little girls talk to Danny saying, come play with
us forever and
that's
ever.
That's them kind of waving the contract at him.
Yes. And he could, descend in that way. For Wendy, it's more like she keeps like, I said this after we left the movie. I was so struck by Wendy's character and how I've always looked at her before. I've always obviously felt bad for her, but I've always kind of looked at her as like kind of ineffective and a little bit weak because she, just the way she runs around and all she does is scream and cry. But like, that's a really unfair way to look at it, because watching it this time, I was like, she's trying so hard to make things okay, to be a good mom, to be a good wife, to be, helpful for her husband, who's obviously going through a difficult time while also taking care of her kid. She's really not thinking about herself at all. And I felt so bad for her. So her struggle is like just trying to keep things okay, trying to keep her family together. And like the threat is that she won't be able to hold her family together.
Yeah, I thought Shelley Duvall was as impressive as Jack Nicholson this time when I watched it. And I think we were I guess we were hit the same way, because I was really struck by her incredible resilience in the face of this mounting abuse.
Yes.
And she does win. She does outfox him. I was incredibly taken by that character upon this watch.
Yeah, I've always looked at her as so passive, and she really isn't passive. It's her, taking and dealing with all of this abuse and then trying to get through it and survive through it and take care of her son. It was really her performance hit me in a way it never has before. And so I like it within this framework, though, that you're building.
Right. And it doesn't work on those two characters, which gives you a point of comparison. But beyond this basic framework of Jack as your Faustus and the Overlook itself as your Mephistopheles, there are plenty of other classic Faustus hallmarks that are found throughout this story. I have three quick examples here.
Ooh, okay.
The first one is Jack's rabid references to his contract that he signed during the whole scene going up the staircase.
I saw you look over at me when that line was said, and I thought, here we go.
I was thrilled. I was smiling ear to ear. He was talking about his obligations to his employer. If that's not a coy, fun allusion to it's perfect.
Well, sure. Well, and just like, it's not even just the word choice. It's his insane dedication to this contract, because Wendy's being like, hey, we're not doing well, things are looking very bad for us, we need to leave, and he's like not prioritizing their well-being at all. He's like, no, I have to do this job. And you're like, Jack, it doesn't matter.
As though his life depended on it.
His soul,
as though he'd signed a contract.
Exactly.
Right.
You're like, Jack, like, it does not matter, like, clearly y'all need to get out of there, but he's so dedicated to it, so it feels much bigger than just, I have a job that I'm employed to do. Yeah.
One of my other favorite moments from Dr. Faustus is the parade of the 7 deadly sins, which I think you can sort of scatter and embody through the other hotel residents, some of the former caretakers. You have Grady, you have the bathtub lady, little girls, the guy in the dog costume. There's plenty that you can add to that list.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that kind of scattering. Instead of it being one scene where you get to see all of these scary sins and evil things, you have them periodically kind of dotted through the film.
And even you get a couple of like hints towards those actual sins. The lady in the bathtub is lust, the Grady killing his family could be wrath. You could, maybe there's like some jealousy somewhere sprinkled in there. Like you could have some of that. I mean, maybe envy. Envy and jealousy is the same thing. Never mind. But like, there's stuff in there. It's fun.
Mappable.
Yeah.
I don't feel the need to actually do that.
Yeah, let's go through them one by one and find them all.
That feels a bit sophomoric. The third one I wanted to play with here, and this one is my favorite. So this is a deep cut. This is one I don't think I've ever been able to talk about on the show before, but it is one of my very favorite moments from the play.
Oh, okay.
So this is at the very end. It's literally the last 2 lines that Faustus has before the demons drag him to hell, and we get a little kind of pissy epilogue where we eulogize him and blame him for everything, almost with a narrator voice where we're talking to the audience. The last things he says, as he's screaming out to the demons, he's attempting to recant and convert and all these other things to save his ass. And the last things he yells out for are his books and Mephistopheles. And I never see these elements adapted into what I consider Faustus retellings. But upon this rewatch of The Shining, I caught both of them in beautiful new contexts. So the first one, calling out for Mephistopheles. I think you can read that and kind of reframe that as the way we see Jack embedded in the Overlook via the final photograph.
Yeah, sure.
That is him reaching this final permanent union with his Mephistopheles, the Overlook Hotel.
Okay.
The other one, where the traditional Faust character calls out for his books, I think that is where we kind of flip that in The Shining to Wendy's discovery that Jack has not been writing anything this entire time.
Yeah, yeah.
That he's just been writing all work and no play, makes Jack a dull boy. And that is a beautiful dovetail. Obviously, this book is about a writer. This movie is about a writer. But it combines two Faustus scenes. So at the very end, where he calls out for his books, here we see that kind of as the abandoned preoccupation of this character who's a writer.
Okay.
But there's also this scene right at the beginning of Dr. Faustus when we're still meeting the character where he trashes his study, his office, and rages at his books. So you're combining that early scene with that last scene to kind of reach this new agony about his books. And I think it clarifies what type of version of the story The Shining is, where it's not about this guy who's at the end of his rope, he's reached the end of his career, and he wants these new supernatural insights and knowledge of the impossible. It's not that altruistic. This is a story about indulgence and grievance and self-interest. And all of those things being masterfully courted and exploited by Mephistopheles in the way the Overlook compels him and plays to all of those weaknesses. And we see him try those same tricks with Wendy and Danny, and it doesn't work. But the way this book preoccupation is shifted here with Jack Torrance, I love that as a way to play out that preoccupation from Dr. Faustus.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I never see that book element in there.
Yeah, I've never heard you really talk about it, probably because you've never seen it anywhere. That's really fascinating.
Yeah,
I like that a lot.
really loved that. And zooming out here as a little wrap up, I think The Shining, watching it this time, and again, I've seen it everyone has seen it a million times.
Yeah.
It felt like such a shockingly human Faustus retelling that was really spotlighting the trauma, the emotional devastation of this story. It was such a sleight of hand because it kind of buries and obscures all the traditional frameworks. There's no mention of demons. There's no sight of demons. I mean, even that, signing away his soul for a drink, it's meant as a euphemism. It's conversational.
Yeah, he doesn't actually do it. Yeah,
right. It's the way we use that phrase. But even through these wisps and gestures, the film hits so many of the benchmark moments and arcs of Dr. Faustus that I think it maps really cleanly. And I'm impressed that it took a dozen rewatches of this movie for that to fall into place for me, of all people.
That's really interesting. I keep trying to, as you're talking about this, I keep trying to think about the book and if this works in the book as well as the movie, because I've read the book and you haven't. And we talked before on the show, I think on our Patreon, but about how the book and the movie are so different, and that's just the way it is. I think there is some similarity in what you're saying in the book as well. I think one thing that's present a lot more in the book is Jack's alcoholism and how much that consumes him. It's obviously mentioned here in the movie, and it's an important part in what you're saying, this key line, I'd sell my soul for a drink. But it's so much more ever present in the book. So I think you could even extend it and say that the Mephistopheles, it is the hotel, but part of it's also just is the alcoholism. Like that's another demon that's plaguing him.
Vices, and deadly sins.
Right. And he's having to contend with that quite a lot more, and thinking about his past mistakes that he's done as a result of his drinking problem. So it's really interesting. I like this framing, and I think we should clarify to the audience, are you saying that this is what Kubrick had in mind?
Oh, no,
or
I
what
never
Stephen
care
King
about intent.
had in mind.
I never care about intent. And my argument about Dr. Faustus and championing this 400-year-old work of art is that I think it is so foundational to almost the way we understand story. And I'm not just, obviously the Marlowe version's my favorite, but I mean this general framework of the Deal with the Devil story. I think it is so foundational to the art of storytelling that it can be embedded in millions of works of art without it even being intentional, because it is just baked into the subconscious of how we understand narrative and conflict and duality.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love that. Yeah, this is a really fun framework. We had never talked about it in this way.
No, we've never. I mean, there are kind of Mount Rushmore type horror movies that are a little daunting to talk about, but I liked having my own angle to get to The Shining finally.
It is always exciting when you rewatch, a favorite or a classic and you get something new out of it, you see it in a new way. And I think genuinely seeing it in the theater was so amazing. I think if you listening ever get the opportunity to see a movie you've already seen and they're like re-showing it in a theater, you should go do it, because it's a totally different experience.
The sound alone.
Because, obviously we didn't see it in theater when it came out because we weren't alive. And so it's nice to be able to do that now. I recommend doing that anytime you can.
Yes, and this is one in the latest in our series of Faust Fable discussions, is what we've started labeling them. Long Legs from earlier this year. I believe The Substance was another one. We've done plenty of that. I've really gone ham with the Faustus stuff this year. I mean, honestly, this is episode 440 of the show. I've brought up Faustus in probably the majority
most of
those.
Even if it's just a moment. Also, I'm remembering we didn't do an episode on The Shining before, but we did do an episode on, oh my God, the Kristen Stewart Princess Diana movie. What is it called?
Spencer.
There's a lot of The Shining in that movie, and I remember talking about that a lot when we talked about that movie. So go check that out. If you haven't seen Spencer, then it might make you want to see it, or if you have but you've never thought about them together, once you see it, you can't unsee it. There's so much beautiful crossover. That's a fantastic movie.
Another beautiful retelling. We have even more horror episodes over on our Patreon. We've done whole bonus roundup episodes. We did one about female body horror. There's almost always a horror movie in one of those monthly or twice a month bonus episodes. So whole pile of other stuff to go check out over there. Thank you very much for continuing this Faustus addiction, for enabling me for yet another episode. And we'll be back here on Friday with another brand new episode.